Let me ask you this. Have you ever been right in the middle of saying something important, something meaningful, when someone just cuts you off? They bulldoze right through your sentence like it never mattered. And in that moment, you're stuck between biting your tongue or biting back. Let's get one thing clear right up front. Most of the time, when someone interrupts you, it's not personal. It might feel personal. It might sting a little, how? It might cause that little spark in your chest. The one that says, oh, they don't respect me, or why even bother talking if they're not listening? But the truth is, interruptions aren't always rooted in disrespect. Sometimes it's excitement. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes people just don't know how to wait. How? And sometimes they've just never been taught how valuable silence can be. Now, that doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean you let it slide. But it does mean you don't always need to make it a battle, because how you respond, that's what determines the tone. That's what sets the standard. How? That's what teaches people how you expect to be treated in a conversation, not through dominance, not through volume, but through poise. Most people think power is loud, that the one who speaks the most wins, that the person who interrupts has control. But the truth is, and lean in here, real control is quiet. Real control is being able to pause, breathe, and still own the room without raising your voice. Let's walk through this. Imagine you're sharing an idea in a meeting. You've thought it through. You've chosen your words. And right in the middle, someone cuts in. Maybe they're excited. Maybe they're trying to one-up you. Maybe they just weren't listening in the first place. How? At that moment, you have two choices. You can either shrink and let them steer the wheel, or you can stay steady. Not by arguing, not by interrupting them back, but by gently holding the space. That might look like waiting until they finish, then calmly saying, I'd like to circle back to what I was saying earlier. I wasn't finished with that thought. Simple. Respectful. Direct. How? Or it might mean raising a finger, not in aggression, just in clarity, and saying, give me 1 second to wrap this up, and then I'm all ears. What that does is powerful. It doesn't just stop the interruption. It redirects the energy. It sets a new tone, one of mutual respect. One where both voices matter, but you're reminding them that yours is still speaking. Too often, we either fight interruptions with interruptions or we retreat into silence. But there's a third way, and it's the most effective. It's when you stay grounded, stay calm, and hold your line. You don't need to be defensive. You just need to be deliberate. Because here's what most people miss. You can teach people how to treat you without scolding them. You can set boundaries without burning bridges. How? And you can respond to interruption with leadership, not frustration. Leadership in a conversation doesn't mean talking the most. It means listening well, speaking clearly, and knowing when to hold space for yourself. And when you respond to interruption with that kind of energy, people notice. They feel it. They shift. And that shift, that's influence. Now let's get deeper into this, the pause. See, everyone talks about the comeback. Everyone wants the right words. How? The perfect clap back. The thing to say that stuns the room and makes the other person look foolish. But that's ego. That's theater. That's not communication. You want something more powerful. Master the pause. Let me explain. When someone interrupts you, especially when it feels rude, your body reacts first. How? Your shoulders tense up. Your breathing shortens. Your brain starts racing, looking for a response. That's the moment where most people either lash out or shut down. But if you can take a breath, just a beat, you reclaim the moment. That pause is your anchor. It's your moment to gather your thoughts, to check your tone, to decide if you're reacting or responding. And in that stillness, something magical happens. You step out of emotional reactivity. How? And you step into intentional communication. And that's the difference between someone who wins the moment and someone who wins the respect. Let's say someone cuts you off mid-sentence. Instead of immediately speaking over them or going silent, you pause, you turn slightly toward them. You wait, not for their sake, but for yours. You pause because you are not scrambling to be heard. You are choosing to speak when it matters most. Then you say, how? I'd like to finish what I was saying. I think it's important we stay with one thought before jumping to the next. That's not just a sentence. How? That's leadership. That's grace. That's power. You're not just talking, you're guiding. And when you guide a conversation like that, how? People start listening differently. They might not even realize it, but you've just elevated the entire tone of the room. And you didn't need to interrupt. You didn't need to raise your voice. You just needed to know the value of your pause. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. How? People remember how they felt in your presence more than what you said. And when you respond to an interruption with calm confidence, you create an emotional imprint. How? One that says, I'm not shaken by chaos. I lead with clarity. That kind of energy is rare, and rare is respected. Now, it takes practice. It's not easy. How? Especially if you've spent most of your life either being talked over or taught to stay quiet. If you were raised in a loud household or a fast, moving environment, or a workplace where only the most aggressive voices got airtime, pausing might feel unnatural. It might feel like you're losing control. But you're not. You're building a new kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need to interrupt to be seen. The kind that doesn't need to dominate to matter. You are stepping into your authority. The kind that isn't earned through noise, but through intention. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You'll notice when people try to jump in, you'll notice the urge to rush or react. And you'll breathe through it. You'll stay centered. How? And your response will carry a weight that only comes from people who've done the work. The kind of work that says, I know my voice matters. I don't need to fight for space. I create it. That's the message. This isn't about correcting everyone who interrupts you. It's about becoming so grounded in your own communication that people naturally begin to adjust around you. They feel the presence. They feel the clarity. And they respect the way you manage moments, even the uncomfortable ones. You don't need to win every verbal exchange. How? You just need to lead one conversation at a time with calm, assertive strength. And you can do that every time by choosing the pause over the pushback. So the next time you're in that moment, when someone cuts in and you feel that fire rise up in your chest, don't ignore it. But don't let it control you either. How? Use it as your signal, a reminder, not to power up, but to power down just enough to breathe, pause, and speak with purpose. Because once you master that pause, you'll never have to raise your voice to raise your value again. Some hear that word and instantly assume conflict. They think putting up a boundary means pushing someone away, building a wall, making things cold or distant. But in reality, boundaries don't push people away. They pull the right kind of respect closer. Boundaries aren't rude. They're honest. How? And they're one of the greatest tools we have for building relationships that are both strong and sustainable. Think about this. You wouldn't drive on a road with no lines and no signs and expect it to go well. People need to know where to go, when to stop, how much space they have. That's what creates flow. That's what creates safety. And communication works the same way. Boundaries create the structure that lets trust grow. Now, here's where most people get tripped up. They think boundaries are only for big dramatic situations. Something serious happens, a line gets crossed, and then they finally speak up. But healthy communication isn't about waiting until something breaks. How? It's about speaking clearly from the beginning, with intention, not tension. Let's say you're in a conversation and someone keeps cutting you off. How? Finishing your sentences or shifting the subject before you've made your point. A lot of people would just let it slide. They'd tell themselves, how? It's not a big deal, or I don't want to make this awkward, while slowly building up quiet resentment. But a boundary isn't a punishment. It's just clarity. It's saying, I'd like to finish my thought before we move on, or let me wrap this up. How? And then I want to hear your side. That's not rude. That's structure. That's how adults have respectful conversations, not by avoiding discomfort, but by meeting it with clarity and care. And the key word here is mutual. Boundaries work best when both people understand that the goal is respect on both sides. It's not about control. It's about consideration. You're not shutting someone down. You're inviting them into a space where both voices matter. And once people see that, the whole energy shifts. Now here's the deeper truth. How? The people who get most upset when you set a boundary are usually the ones who benefited from you not having one. So don't use other people's reactions as your measurement for whether your boundary was valid. Instead, ask yourself this: was I clear? Was I calm? Was I kind? If the answer is yes, then you're not being rude. You're being responsible. How? And being responsible with your communication is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect. But let's take it a step further. You can't have boundaries without clarity, and you can't have clarity without confidence. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the calm, grounded kind. The kind that doesn't need to defend itself every 5 seconds. The kind that doesn't need to argue to be heard. That kind of confidence is rare, and it's magnetic. When you walk into a conversation knowing what you stand for, what you will accept, and what you won't, you show up differently. You speak with intention. You listen without fear. You ask better questions. You hold space instead of trying to fill it. How? And that calm confidence creates clarity not just for you, but for everyone in the room. People don't want to guess what you mean. How? They don't want to read between the lines or decode your silence. They want directness without disrespect. Honesty without hostility. And when you learn to speak that way, clear and calm, your conversations stop being battlegrounds and start becoming bridges. Let's make it practical. How? You're in a one-on-one conversation and someone starts overstepping. Maybe it's how they're speaking to you, the tone they're using, how, or just the pressure you're feeling in the moment. You don't have to explode. You don't have to shut down. You can simply say, how? I want to continue this conversation, but I need it to feel more respectful, or I'm open to hearing your thoughts, but not in that tone. Notice what you're doing there. You're not accusing. You're anchoring. How? You're setting a boundary and providing clarity, all without turning it into a confrontation. How? But you can't do that unless you've already built a foundation of calm confidence within yourself. You have to know your values before you speak them. You have to know your limits before you can communicate them. That's why self-reflection is essential, because confidence doesn't start in the conversation. It starts in the quiet before the conversation. That's the space where you ask yourself, what am I actually trying to say? What's the real message beneath my frustration? Am I seeking control or clarity? Once you get honest about that, the way you speak changes. The way you carry yourself changes. You don't get pulled into every emotional storm. You don't try to win by being louder. You start to understand that real connection comes from composure, not dominance. And this applies everywhere. At work, at home, in friendships, even with yourself. How? You've probably had moments where you agreed to something you didn't want to do just to keep the peace. How? Or where you stayed silent when something bothered you because you didn't want to rock the boat. But every time you avoid clarity, you create confusion. How? Not just for others, but for you. Because clarity isn't just a gift to the other person. It's a gift to yourself. It lets you leave the conversation without second guessing what you said, without replaying the moment in your mind all day, without that gnawing feeling that you weren't fully honest with them or with yourself. When you get good at being clear and calm, you stop carrying around emotional weight that was never yours to hold. You speak your truth and you let that truth stand, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to apologize for your boundaries. You don't need to shrink so other people feel more comfortable. Because the goal isn't comfort, the goal is clarity, and with clarity comes trust. People trust those who are consistent, who mean what they say, who say what they mean, and who don't disguise confusion as kindness. That's the trap too many fall into, thinking that being unclear is the same thing as being compassionate. But compassion without clarity turns into enabling. How? And enabling leads to resentment, and resentment erodes connection. So the more clearly you communicate, the more stable your relationships become. How? Because no one's walking on eggshells. No one's guessing. No one's wondering if you're really okay or secretly keeping score. Everything is on the table. Everything is open. And that openness creates safety. But that starts with you. You have to practice being direct without being harsh. You have to get used to saying things like, that doesn't work for me, or I'd rather not continue this right now, or here's what I need moving forward, or not with tension. Not with attitude, but with steady, intentional language that shows you've thought it through. You'll be surprised how often people actually appreciate that level of communication, even if they're taken aback at first, even if it catches them off guard, because deep down, people respect people who respect themselves. And nothing says self-respect like the courage to be clear. The truth is, boundaries and clarity aren't about controlling others. How? They're about controlling the quality of your conversations. And that's something worth protecting. So if you find yourself in situations where your voice gets lost, Where your needs get blurred, where the conversation always leaves you feeling drained, stop looking for a louder voice. Start building a steadier one. One that knows what it's here to say. One that doesn't shake every time the room gets tense. One that can pause, speak, and lead without pushing. That voice is inside you. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard. There's a misunderstanding a lot of people carry, often without realizing it. How? They think that being heard means being the loudest person in the room. That to make your point land, you have to argue it harder. That the only way to win respect is to wrestle for it. But what they're really doing is chasing validation through volume. And that rarely works. How? Being heard isn't about overpowering anyone. It's not about out-talking someone or proving you're right. It's about presence. And presence doesn't start with your mouth. It starts with your mindset. When you lead a moment instead of fighting for it, people notice something different in you. You carry stillness. You carry certainty. You don't panic when someone disagrees or interrupts or tries to shift the tone. You don't match chaos with chaos. You reset the energy in the room by holding your posture, holding your breath for a second, and choosing your response. That's what leadership looks like in conversation, not control, composure. It's the ability to stay rooted in who you are, even when someone else is trying to rattle you, even when voices rise, even when emotions run high. You don't need to flinch every time someone gets loud. How? You don't need to correct every word they say. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit in the middle of that noise and speak with measured. How? Steady conviction. That kind of energy doesn't scream. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't get desperate to prove a point. Because it knows something. Real influence isn't earned by shouting over people. It's earned by how you carry yourself when things get uncomfortable. How? You don't have to dominate a moment to lead it. You just have to stop giving away your calm. The reason so many people default to defensiveness is because they've never been shown another way. They were taught, maybe by family, maybe by workplace culture, how, maybe by experience, that being silent means being weak, and that you have to fight for your space. But the truth is, silence can be strategic, how stillness can be strength. And you don't need to jump at every jab just to prove you're not afraid. You prove it by not being moved. Let's be real. Some conversations aren't fair. Some people will try to bait you, talk over you, twist your words. But if you can hold your center in the middle of all that, something changes. You shift from playing defense to setting the pace. How? You stop reacting to energy and start creating it. And when you lead with that kind of energy, you give the other person a choice. They can either rise to meet your tone, or they can feel the discomfort of their own. But either way, you've shown them something important. You're not here to fight. You're here to communicate. And communication, when done right, doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be clear, grounded, consistent. Sometimes the best way to lead a moment is to slow it down, to stop rushing to the next point, the next defense, the next rebuttal, to breathe, and to respond with a tone that says, I'm here, I'm calm, and I'm not going to be pulled out of that just because things are getting tense. Because that's when trust starts to build. Most people think trust is built in calm, easy conversations. But the truth is, trust is tested in tension. It's in the difficult moments, the miscommunications, the interruptions, the misunderstandings, where people learn whether they're safe to keep showing up. And how you respond in those moments tells them everything. If you respond with blame, they shut down. If you respond with sarcasm, they guard up. If you respond with anger, they get defensive. How? But if you respond with clarity and composure, something changes. You take the heat out of the room. You stop the emotional ping pong. You open the door to something better than just being right. You open the door to understanding. And understanding is the real goal. Not winning. How? Not controlling. Not dominating. Understanding creates movement. And movement is what turns difficult moments into meaningful ones. How? But you can't do that if your goal is to be louder. You can't teach someone how to communicate with you if your only tool is criticism. How? You have to model what respect looks like in real time. That means choosing tone over tension. That means using phrases that de-escalate instead of provoke. That means asking questions instead of jumping to conclusions. Phrases like, help me understand what you meant by that, or can we slow down for a second? I want to make sure I'm hearing you clearly. Create space. They let both people breathe, And they show that you're not here to win. You're here to connect. And people remember that. They remember how you handled that moment. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mature, because it was steady, because you showed up not to protect your ego, but to protect the relationship. How? That's leadership. And it doesn't matter whether it's a conversation with your boss, your partner, your friend, or a stranger. The principle is the same. When tension rises, whoever stays composed leads. But let's be clear. Composed doesn't mean cold. It doesn't mean emotionless. How? It means you are managing your emotions, not ignoring them. You feel the heat, you just don't let it decide your words. How it's easy to get drawn into the back and forth, to start matching tone for tone, to take every interruption as a personal attack. How? But when you respond from a regulated place, you teach people something without ever having to preach it. How? You teach them that this is a space where pressure doesn't lead to panic, where disagreement doesn't lead to disrespect, where conflict doesn't lead to chaos. That's a rare skill, and it takes time to develop. But it's one of the most valuable things you can carry into any relationship, personal or professional. How? Because people aren't just listening to your words. They're watching your reactions. They're picking up on your energy. And when your energy says, how? I don't need to fight for space. I know how to hold it. They start to shift. And that shift is subtle but powerful. They start to mirror your tone. How? They start to slow down. They start to think twice before interrupting. Not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it. That's what influence looks like in real time. Not when you force people to listen, but when you make it easier for them to want to. There's nothing soft about that. It's not passive. It's not weak. It's intentional. It's controlled. And it's incredibly effective. But to get there, you have to stop seeing interruptions or tension as a sign you're losing ground. You're not. You're being invited to lead. Every time someone gets heated or reactive, you have a choice. You can escalate with them, or you can choose calm. And that calm is not compliance. How? That calm is leadership, because the goal isn't to overpower someone into silence. The goal is to empower both of you to speak and listen in ways that build something, not break it. That's where teachable trust comes from the moments where things could have gone sideways, but didn't. Because someone somewhere in that room chose to stay steady. Let that someone be you. If this hit home for you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to find their voice again. And remember, in every conversation, you teach others how to value you. So teach well.